after this. We'll go ahead and get started, and I'll turn over to Andrew Bremseth, who's going to, I believe Joel Carlson is on the phone, our legislative consultant.
I'm here.
Yes.
Hey, Joel.
So thank you, Your Honor. Members, we have a new sound system, and we're doing the call-in for the first time, so bear with us. I hope this works. Joel Carlson, who, like the mayor mentioned, is the lobbyist for the city, is going to be key to any and all sales tax work that we do this session. So I asked him if he would just tee it up for us tonight and tell us kind of what to expect, what the process looks like, and some of the things that we need to decide on as we move forward here in the coming days. So Joel, if you want to just take it from here, and we'll jump in here locally as necessary and where appropriate.
Sure. And feel free to, it would be hard for you to wave your hands for me to catch it, but feel free to speak up, and I'm happy to stop and pause whenever there's a question. First of all, Happy New Year to each of you, and looking forward to a fun and successful 2020. I truly appreciate the action the council took towards the end of the year to continue our working relationship, and I really value what we've done on behalf of the city of Fergus Falls and its citizens. So with that, the legislature has presented an exciting and challenging opportunity for local units of government with the local option sales tax changes that they made in the 2019 session. And over the course of the interim, work groups within the city and through the administration and our legislative committee, we've talked about how to best position the city with regard to the new law and what projects might be viable for approval with the new local option sales tax. And part of that, review has included doing some background work with legislative staff that were involved in the change, other lobbyists like at the League of Minnesota Cities to get their background and thoughts about how to best approach this. We've met with the key staff and the policy and the chairs of the tax committee to get their advice and observation. And I think what we're ready to kind of walk through are some things that are very meaningful for the city as far as its growth and development and amenities that it can offer to its citizens, and balancing that with what we know from the legislation and from talking with others as it relates to size and scope and regional significance of projects that we're going to propose. And so I'm probably not in the best position to go through each of the alternatives that we've talked about funding. As we do touch on them, I'm certainly happy to weigh in on what we heard from others relative to their regional importance and how that might fit in with their philosophy of how the new law might work. But that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. And before we get to, kind of analyzing, what we might want to advance in legislation and what needs to be submitted to the committee chairs by the 31st of January, I think we should just also have just a good understanding of what we're walking into when the session starts on February 11th. As you've read in the papers, the state budget continues to be on a positive trend. They're anticipating slightly over $1 billion surplus without inflation factored in, so there is not a strap for cash like we've had in a number of sessions in the past where budget cuts and local government aid and a number of those things are on the chopping block. So that's a positive. The negative on our fiscal picture is that legislators don't really need to do all that much in 2020. There's been a lot of talk about doing a bonding bill, which is also part of our agenda and a very important part of our legislative agenda. But they don't have to do a tax bill. They don't have to pass any particular policy or spending plans because the budget is now in place until July of 2021. So there certainly are no guarantees that they're actually going to get a tax bill accomplished, but we want to be as best positioned as we can so that when the tax would come to a conclusion for paying off the library construction, we want to have a seamless transition into new projects that the city can advance now and be ready to pay for as soon as the library bonds are paid off. So Andrew and Mayor, that's kind of my backdrop heading into the session. Happy to answer questions both about the session or about the mechanics of the sales tax. I have to tell you, Andrew has done as much studying as anyone on this sales tax plan than anyone in the state. I think he knows the legislation as well as anybody, but we're happy to answer questions before we kind of begin a discussion about what really can benefit the city as we advance what the legislature has allowed, which is up to 5 different projects that can be submitted in one proposal. So, Andrew, with that, I'll put it back to you and answer questions, or just see how the conversation goes from there. Now that we have kind of an understanding of what we're looking at heading into 2020.
Great, thank you, Joel.
Thanks, Joel.
That was helpful and maybe a good backdrop for what we need to decide on tonight. Real quickly, before I jump into these 5 projects, I just want to mention it for the council's benefit. Joel mentioned by the 31st of January, we have to have a local resolution to the tax chairs for both the House and the Senate. And so we've kind of slated the next meeting here on January 21st as the last opportunity for us to pass the local resolution. So that is what we're going to do if the council decides this is the way they want to go. We've been working with the League of Minnesota Cities, who's been working with House Research to develop a resolution for cities like ours to pass. I have that template, so we need to make some decisions tonight as it relates to what's going to be in that resolution that's before you in 2 weeks. We have to justify regional significance in that resolution, and that's also the time where we have to determine the amount of money that we're seeking for each of these projects, up to 5 projects. So we, as a legislative committee, met earlier last week and walked through these projects and wanted to visit based on the feedback that we've gotten, the meetings that we've had with Joel and legislators, the League of Minnesota Cities, and other folks. And we do have some recommendations we want to bring forward this evening. And I also want to say that the legislative committee is prepared and is willing and desires to have a recommendation from you all this evening to then meet between now and the 21st to talk about what that local resolution will contain and make those final decisions and get those final numbers figured out. So if we leave
To bring back,
on the
take
21st.
the recommendations from this discussion, have legislative committee make a final recommendation back to the council.
Yep, so all decisions have to be made by the 21st. I can't state that enough. We don't have another meeting to comply with the deadline within the statute. So with that being said, we had 5 projects that we identified through council retreats, various work sessions, committees working on this, citizens participating. A lot of hard work went into these, and all of that's very much appreciated. So thank you, everybody from the community who's played a role. I know a lot of time has gone into a lot of these, especially some like the Aquatic Center. I think we're on year number 4 now, so that committee's done a lot of work, and it's appreciated. Those 5 projects, again, for everybody's refreshment here, are the Fire Station Renewal Project, which contains much-needed upgrades to the 1976 fire station, as well as the replacement of a 1995 aerial rescue truck, or a ladder truck. That's the only truck of its kind within a 45-mile radius. The cost estimate that we presented at the last work session was $4.5 million. 10 minutes ago, I got a new number. And I look at Chief Muckow, and maybe he can real briefly just tell us what that is and what's happened since the last meeting, so everybody knows what's going on.
Yeah, so since the last meeting, the architect firm that we've been working with, Schultz and Associates, and this was kudos to Engineer Yvarro, that he really said, where did we get our initial number from? And it really was estimations of what we thought we could do based on, a new fire facility down in Monticello was built, so we kind of got some estimates there. working with them, the most recent number they came to us with was 4.6 million for the station itself. And then the aerial truck that's a pretty good estimate that we did receive early on, and they're estimating the manufacturers 4 to 5 years out that an aerial truck would be about 1.5 million. So that brings ours up certainly by 1.5 million. So we're up at what, 6.1 for the fire station renewal project. So, and that's, again, these numbers are totally hot off the press, and we haven't even been able to decipher through what all with the architect firm, what could be trimmed and what are we really, we know what we're getting because we've been working with them on plans and ensuring that the station remodel is really encompassing what we really desire it to be, and that is having built-in props for the firefighters within not only our community but for the region that would come here to train. So that's kind of been our first and foremost, and that includes adding a level to the fire station currently on the administrative and living side for the resident firefighters that are there. But within there, I'm sure there's always things that we could look at, but I know it hasn't been a grandiose. We need everything super fancy. Give us the top of the line. It's been very how much can we squeeze into our current walls, almost is where we're at, and just going up a level. So.
Do you get a pole to slide down if you get a second one?
Well, there is a fire pole listed in.
There was one right here.
I say this room used to have a fire pole. I think there was 2 before. Yeah. So it's almost like history repeating itself. With our station renewal, the dorm stuff for firefighters, the firefighter living area is upstairs, which it was here, and then administrative things would be on the lower level. So. But
All right.
I do give a lot of credit to the architects we've been working with on what all they've been doing. And they've noticed some needs around the fire station, which anytime you start looking at a project, you really start diving into the mechanical things of a building. And they certainly, just through their work, they're like, there's some things that should be updated here. So there's been some, I wouldn't say surprises, but certainly things that have added that we maybe thought we could work around. But they, through their recommendation, they've helped us along a lot. So.
Good. Thank you, Ryan. Those are the types of things we need to work through over the next 2 weeks, by the way, so that's why tonight's so important. And I will say that that project's been positively received. One of the things that legislators said we could do to show regional significance would be to get some letters of support from the townships that we serve, and Chief Muckow has arranged a meeting with the townships for later this week, so that's appreciated, and those things are underway. Trails is the second project that we talked about. We estimated the cost at about $2.5 million. That included a couple segments related to the Glacial Edge Trail that would connect the Central Lakes Trail to this inner city or inside the city through the dairy property and up towards the Kirkbride. So a significant area of trails, as well as $500,000 to serve as a match for the sewer pipe infrastructure to lift the sewer pipe in the river. The third project was the Aquatic Center project that I referenced earlier. That project came in at an estimated cost of $7.1 million. Nothing on that project has changed. They've had that project figured out for quite some time and have been consistent in what they've felt was an adequate and appropriate design on that. I don't know if anybody wants to share anything else, or we just keep rolling. Good. Okay. The Streets and Infrastructure project was the fourth one. That included a joint roundabout with Ottertail County for $1.8 million up at Union and Fur, as well as some pedestrian crossings and intersection improvements related to Stanton, Union, Washington, that area, and a improvement to the Lake Alice watershed. We were estimating the cost of that project at $4.3 million. And then last but not least, D Lagoon Park improvements, which would be a significant upgrade to the campground based on a master plan that was completed by the city a handful of years ago, as well as soccer, baseball, softball complexes getting renovated, restroom facilities, and lighting upgrades. So currently, the soccer complex doesn't have restroom facilities or lights, so those would both be new additions. And the improvements to the softball and baseball areas would be a upgrade of the existing lights as well as new facilities to replace existing facilities. So those are the 5 projects we talked about. Oh, and I should mention that one is about $5 million is what we're estimating with the added cost of the infrastructure to bring water and sewer from where it ends today into the campground and the new facilities. So those are the 5 projects that we have been looking at and talking about. As I mentioned previously, the legislative committee had a chance to get together last week and talk about bringing back a recommendation to the council this evening for this work session to maybe help start the conversation and to guide us in hopefully a direction that we can all agree on so we can move down this road to success. And I will say that one of the things that we talked about initially was just that we felt the total project cost, which has crept up to over 23 million if we were to do all 5 of these projects, is too high and needed to be trimmed. So we started with that premise and talked about where do we go from there based on the feedback that we've gotten from legislators and the things that make the most sense with this funding mechanism as a sales tax. And if you guys want to jump in whenever, feel free. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. All right. So one of the things that we're recommending based on legislator feedback is to remove the streets and infrastructure project. And the rationale is simply this. We feel that Lake Alice would be hard to justify as regionally significant. It's really contained within the city limits of the community, and that's a huge thing related to the sales tax question. And one of the comments that we received from one of the legislators was they do not want to see money used on streets that are also used, or that state aid is also used on. So we're eligible for state aid funding, and in this case, Union Avenue, while it's only the roundabout project that we were looking at on Union Avenue, that is certainly a state aid eligible street. So we felt that this is potentially one that could be trimmed. The $1.8 million roundabout at Fur and Union hasn't been, in my opinion, overly well received by the businesses in the area, and there would have to be a lot of additional work done on that to get to a point where I think the city would buy into that to the tune of $1.8 million. So we thought that as a legislative committee, this might be a time to take a step back on that and look at that through other ways, other lenses, and see how that goes. Frankly, I don't think spending $1.8 million on a roundabout transforms our city in any way, and we have an opportunity to do that through some of these other projects. So that reduces the cost by $4.3 million, as we stated earlier. The second item that we talked about was that $500,000 for the sewer pipe funding that I just mentioned a second ago. The legislative committee was comfortable recommending that funding should be removed from a sales tax question and should be sought through other means if that's decided that that's the appropriate project and the way we should go. We talked a little bit about trails as a whole, if we should remove the entire category of trails, and that's something that we said the council needs to discuss in greater detail tonight. One of the things about trails is there's a lot of funding sources related to trails, so it's not like this is the only option for the city to receive money. There's a lot of different pots of money as it relates to trails. While they're all competitive and may take time, they certainly do exist. So something to keep in mind. We talked about leaving the fire station project as is. I mentioned that we'll be meeting with township officials and we'll get the most recent number. We just heard that, but we'll continue to work to refine that and have more details as it relates to that. We are recommending to leave the aquatic center as is. There is, as we talked about previously, some fundraising expectations. Those haven't been established, but I just wanted to remind everyone that we do need to seek the legislative approval for the whole amount, irregardless of what the fundraising is, in case there's shortfalls or unexpected. So keeping that in at $7.1 million. And then we talked about the D Lagoon Park improvements, and we certainly feel there's good merit in a lot of those pieces, but there's probably some moving parts there that could be reduced. The one that we identified up front was the lighting at the soccer fields. They currently operate without those, and it sounds in discussions with them, they would be very pleased with a restroom and concession facility, and the lights would just be a bonus. So if we can start whittling away at some of these things, that helps to bring that number down. That's reduced the project by about $62,000. So by removing the ones that I just talked about, including the soccer field lighting, we would reduce the project cost by about $6.86 million, which would trim about 5 years off the sales tax based on what our current collection is, right about $1.3 million. Of course, like I said, I just got new numbers, so I haven't updated my calculations, but based on the numbers we had previously with the fire department at 4.5 million, our total remaining would have been about 16.6 million, or 12 and a half years of sales tax if our collection were to be stagnant and remain the same as it is today over that period of time. So that's the recommendation of the legislative committee, but certainly the city council should have good, robust discussion this evening and talk about what they want to see and how they want us to bring this thing back.
Thanks, Andrew. So,
And Andrew,
yeah,
I appreciate going through each one of those. And as I mentioned in my opening, this is an exciting opportunity where you can have a chance to construct some local amenities and get community buy-in for them. The challenge is that you face is that the statute doesn't really tell us what regional significance is. They don't tell us what matrix you use, how many visits, how many people would use it, how far away is something from the type of amenity you're talking about building, like an aquatic center. Do you have to go to Moorhead or St. Cloud? They don't really tell us those things, and so it's a bit of guesswork that we're trying to navigate here, but it was, I think, as Andrew indicated, some of the things that they're talking about not moving forward, nobody said don't do that, but you could just tell from their reaction that that wasn't what they were intending as they were adopting that legislation, that this, local option sales tax would be used for. So they didn't say, to us, and Andrew, I think we'd all agree, they didn't say, don't bring that one to us. But you could just tell that they just weren't enthusiastic about it based on what their thoughts were about the process that we're going to embark on. So it's a challenge because we don't know how they're going to address these. They haven't done it before, and there's no statutory model. So it really is kind of our best guess, and I think the better and more detailed discussion we have about what we can best sell to the voters and to the legislature, I think is the best position for us to be in. So I'm glad you're doing this today.
thanks, Joel. All right, so we'll kick off some conversation.
Let me just real quickly, our finance guy just gave me the numbers, so thank God for him. With the fire department being at 6.1 million, aquatics at 7.1 million, and D Lagoon at 5 million, based on the recommendation I just talked about. And again, that's something the council needs to discuss. That hasn't been decided. That's a total of 18.2 million, so at 1.3 million a year in collections would be about a 14-year sales tax, assuming that all three were successful through the legislature and then successfully approved by the local voters. So keep that in mind.
Sure. And then I'll just go back and make some comments on the trails that you'd mentioned, because I think there's, I don't have mine in front of me, I'm just looking at there's like 4 segments of that trail proposal. We already, I think, agreed that the sewer pipe, as much as we'd like to see that raised, is probably better for a different funding source. And I think the Trails Committee was kind of going that way as well. And then the segment connecting Wright Park to Central Lakes Trail is mostly on road. I don't know if we get a lot of bang for a buck with that one. And then with the south side of the river walk, there's some other funding sources that have been identified for that as well. So I guess what I'm getting at is that I think the Trails Committee and the Legislative Committee can rework that and bring something back. And I would say this too, I know it's late in the game, but the Nordic Trail Association. It's basically Win Roberts and Eric Antonison have, many of you know, have groomed some cross-country ski trails out at our regional treatment center. And I've heard nothing but just incredibly positive comments on that. And that's a lot of volunteer hours, but it's a very small investment to make a big impact. And had a lot of discussions with people over the last couple weeks since we discussed this. And I was actually at Giants Ridge over the weekend, and I saw on one of their small hills they had a tow rope, just a very basic T-bar tow rope. And I thought, there used to be cross-country ski trails and some skiing tubing opportunities at Old Smoky. And I think for a very minimal amount, we could make a huge impact. I've heard that from a lot of different people. So I would just like the opportunity to have that Trails Committee briefly look at that. There's some numbers that have been put together, but I've heard nothing but really positive comments from the community about possibly looking at something like that. And I know there'd have to be insurance and it's a short time frame, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't at least look at that. So that's one recommendation I would make back to the Trails Committee. Again, just for consideration to bring back to you. So that's one thing I would recommend. Tom or Justin, you haven't sat in on all the meetings. Did you have anything to start the conversation?
I'd say Andrew did a pretty good job of summing up our discussions. I think that we had good conversation in our committee meetings, and I'm pretty happy with what we've come forward with, and I'd just like to hear what the rest of the council thinks.
I'd better say the same thing. I think, we put in some time on this and formed some discussion around this, but it'd be nice to hear from our fellow council members and on their opinion or, things that we need to modify.
Maybe we could start off by discussing the streets and infrastructure. I mean, I think we all agree that that's a need and a priority. However, $2 million in a roundabout, it's just, and the reaction that we got from the legislators, it was kind of clear to us that might not be the best project to bring forward, but we wanted to get what does the rest of the council feel. I mean, as Andrew mentioned, from the public as well, I didn't hear a lot of positive comments from the public about spending $2 million on a roundabout at that area. So
I haven't heard too many positive things about roundabouts, period. Every time one gets put in, some of the things that I hear just, conversations. And being in England, I think they're highly overrated. Well, my daughter scares me on a roundabout in England. So
Only your daughter. You won't drive with me.
yeah, I every time I see roundabouts go up, I never really hear anything positive about them.
sure. Scott?
I was on the Streets and Infrastructure Committee, and so to the end that a member of a group needs to kind of defend their work,
Sure.
I guess I could make a few comments. First of all, your opening comments about Lake Alice and the likelihood that it could be considered regional or not. The way that we came to the conclusion that it could be discerned as regional, besides being an attraction for the city, as any of the parks might be, it's also connected to the watershed that goes into the Otter Tail River. And so that connection to the watershed is probably what makes it more regional than any other factor. I mean, all of the water that goes through Lake Alice goes into the river, and that's the connection outside of our city. But then it's also a regionally significant, unique aspect of the city, having a lake in town. Whether it's something that rises to the level of, getting the legislature to buy in, I don't know, but that's how that came to pass. And even if that was the only piece of the puzzle that survived this, I guess I'd be pleased for that. I think that the comments that have been made about the roundabout on Union Avenue, frankly, that probably would have been a hard sell to get a lot of public support for that. And, that may or may not be the best direction. But the sense that the Streets and Infrastructure Committee had was that we needed to find a way to try and tap into this money. People are expecting us to fix the streets. And it's like, well, if you're not going to do it with this, how are you going to do it? And we needed to try and answer that question. And the reality was we can't use this kind of money for neighborhood streets typically because they're not considered regional. So how do we get the regional connection to any project? And what we brought forward were the best chances of something being considered regional. It's a main corridor for the city, Union Avenue. We're probably looking at a stronger argument for the work downtown, right over on the Stanton intersection, for example, for pedestrian safety in that area. That's probably the strongest piece of that whole puzzle when you look at where other funding could come from and everything else. So that's my 2 bits worth on that. And whether or not we, vote to approve it or not, I just thought I'd explain some of the rationale behind it.
And I appreciate, and I will say this, Scott, I agree with pretty much everything you said. And the legislative committee did discuss the importance of Lake Alice and that watershed and the possibility, maybe that's a project that's a priority that's through Clean Water Legacy, or maybe there's a way, we're trying to figure out how we, could make a project like that move forward, and we just don't know if it's gonna be able to stand alone in this process, but again, that's for the council. But, maybe we can go back and take a look at from Lake Alice to that Stanton Avenue area with, maybe we're making a case for regional significance with just that portion. Jim?
I was on that committee also, and I think the biggest part of that is the Stanton Avenue area for the safety and everything, especially when we're going to be bringing people across.
Sure.
Union Avenue over on the east side of town, and it's going to be a big deal. I know we used to have a crosswalk there, and there's nothing now. So we really don't have a safe way to cross that street. The other thing about the roundabouts, I love them. We go to St. Martin. When we first got there wasn't a roundabout there. There's now 5 of them, and it has sped everything up so much, it's unbelievable. It really does speed things up. There's no stopping or starting. You just swing yourself in there and around you go, and once you get used to it, it's not bad at all.
You're here.
Yeah.
If that intersection for pedestrian crossing and that kind of stuff is that important, and we're reworking some trail stuff, would that be possibility to sneak into that piece? Or
I think
I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, it's particularly the Stanton piece.
Yeah.
Because if there's going to be a trail downtown, that's, the Stanton piece is an important piece.
I think that's a good point.
Can I put Claire on the spot maybe real quick? We just submitted a grant opportunity at the tail end of last week related to the intersection improvements down here as it relates to the downtown riverfront project on Union. So that'd be Stanton Avenue. Do you know the extent of what that would cover? Because there's got to be some overlap between the two. So and we can refine that, but I guess what I'm saying is we're already looking at other funding sources for maybe a portion of what we're talking about.
Brian would have a better understanding of that. Both of them prepared the application on the city's behalf for that project, but it would include work for the pedestrian crossing, which would include also the Glacial Trail crossing there. That would include some lighting, some pedestrian signals, and possibly like a little boulevard island in the middle.
Center median or so some of that work, there's a little bit of overlap, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. So we can, if this is something that's important to the council, we can refine that over the next few days and figure out what that is. But we are exploring other avenues of funding too, as it relates to these more important, probably, or more immediate needs that we have.
Is that consensus then?
Yes.
We'll try to focus on that Stanton.
Yeah.
See if there's a way to work it in with one of the projects would be a standalone. What other thoughts and questions? Are people okay with the changes Andrew made to the D Lagoon? I'm trying to remember. Tom was on the D Lagoon. Who else was on the D Lagoon? Brent?
What's that?
The lagoon?
Sea Lagoon? That one there, ever since I saw the master plan back that was done 4 years ago, I just figured that this was something that should have been done. And with everything going on with the added of the Frisbee golf down there and everything else, I just think that anything we do is going to make it where we're going to be drawing more people into town. More people are going to be coming in from out of town to use it. And I just think this case, it's a win-win situation as far as, I mean, with the lights, it's something, if we cut one thing out, we can always add them later at a different point if we need to trim back on a few items. But, I mean, with the soccer tournaments, I mean, it would have been nice to be able to have the lights because, we would have been able to, run longer days and more tournaments and more people coming in. So, I don't mind those going off so much if it's, something that gets passed and we can possibly bring in into the future. So,
Thanks. So are people okay with that modification? Scott, and then Justin, I'm sorry, you had your hand up.
Well, I think we talked about this in our committee level, the new resolution we had for the city to change street lighting through Otter Tail Power. Is that something we could explore with, I mean, I know that's not street lights out there, but explore having Otter Tail Power put in the infrastructure and we pay a yearly maintenance cost as we would on our local streets? Or is that not something we could?
I don't think they can do that as part of, well, yeah, it wouldn't be with the street lighting, for sure.
No, but I mean, it's like a separate project, but the same financing?
I don't know.
We would still need a funding source for it, that being the issue. We were able to reduce what we're spending on street lighting and basically reallocate it within the budget, but we did add $35,000 to just that street lighting for the Otter Tail, so we would have,
We'd have to identify an ongoing budget yearly for it, but I mean, we wouldn't have to take it out or have it be a sales tax to build in. They would just do the infrastructure.
if they would, if they would build the infrastructure and them own it.
And I have been talking with them about that because the infrastructure out there is failing, so it is being looked at.
So it'd just be nice to know if we could take it out, but still get it done, what it would cost per year to find in the budget somewhere.
Scott, and then
The-
Jim.
Maybe you could review, when you were pointing out what the Day Lagoon project would include, we talked about the concessions and restroom building, and I think there's a real felt need for that, and that could easily be a priority that people could get behind. You mentioned the lighting as an option, but maybe you said, maybe you didn't, but as far as the campground renovation portion of it, was that still included, or did you pull that out?
Yeah, Your Honor, Councilmember Kwame, the entirety of the master plan as it relates to D Lagoon is still included.
Okay.
So that's the bulk of the cost. The baseball lights are really expensive. Was it 800,000 or some ridiculous number? But the remainder of the cost is mostly attributable to the improvements of the campground facility. And that will include, additional sites, restroom facilities. There's maps and drawings and stuff I can provide. I have them here, but, I couldn't tell you all the details off my head, but it's pretty elaborate and a nice expansion that they've designed through that process.
I think that included full hookups, I mean, electric, sewer, water.
Right, and I saw all that in the original plan, it was just whether that piece of the whole package was included or not is what I missed, so.
Yep.
Jim?
Two things. Baseball lights, does that include both fields and also the softball fields, or is that just,
Yeah, it is both baseball fields and the complex.
okay, all right. Number two, on the lighting for the soccer fields, maybe the soccer organization can do a fund drive to raise money to put lights in. I mean, it's an opportunity for them to step up too. I know when the soccer fields were originally built, the American Legion donated $100,000 and the city donated $100,000 to do that in the first place. And it's something that they could go out and, I know everybody's out trying to raise money for all the stuff going on, and it's still something they might want to look at doing.
And the Soccer Association is willing and ready to assist in the fundraising. That they were ready to start a campaign and then heard about the possibility of a sales tax, and so they've got the willingness to do the fundraising. We just and also there's other groups too that we can seek out for support. Perhaps the softball leagues and the baseball players and the frisbee golfers too can maybe pitch in a little something too. So pitch, get it. But Yeah, so we want to partner with all of the groups that we can to help, the project succeed. It just, we don't have a complete picture of what that would look like yet.
Yes.
One of the things that I think has been a handicap to getting soccer tournaments is that those fields aren't handicap accessible. And so that's something I want to be sure if that's the goal, be sure that that's looked at.
Yeah, and that would be a component that we would look at definitely because of the restroom facility and concessions facility would be handicapped accessible.
What other thoughts do members of the council or anyone, staff or anyone in the audience? Yeah. Do people? Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask a overarching question. What do you?
What's the number?
Well, what do you, as a council, think? How many years do you want to tie up a sales tax? Do you like the 14-year number? Are you scared of that at all? Is it too long, too short? That's just, that helps us frame that as far as, okay, are we good with this? And then knowing that that'll be tied up for 14 years, so.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's not unusual for cities to do that either. So, I mean, it's.
The tricky thing is that you're going, right now, we'd be going probably with 4 questions to the voters, not knowing if all 4 would be approved. So, that's the tricky thing.
Well, we would have to look at the full package as this is what it could be.
Yep, absolutely.
But I would say that I think the goal of this is to, shift where we're at. And so if we're going to do something, then it has to be a big enough number that we can actually make an impact. I mean, one of our challenges as a community is we piecemeal these things out. And so, we do project 1, we wait 5 to 10 years to pay it off, then we do project 2, and by that time, project 1 is in need of R&M. So I think if we can do it like this, it's the same whether we pay it today or whether we do it again. So I think we get bigger impact for our dollar if we spend it today. If we could put 3 or 4 items on the ground now, then the theory is then we get people into the community, the 1.3 million a year that we get in sales tax, that should go up. So therefore, kind of quote 14 years might end up being, 10 or 12, if we accomplish what we're setting out to do. And I think we make a statement if we spend $20 million and get 4 projects done in a 2-year period.
Andrew, do you know, the 22.6 million was too high, that total project, and if we're even looking at 18.2 million, is there a number they're looking at that's reasonable?
Good question, Councilmember Hagberg. The legislative committee is the ones who were thinking that number is too high, and there was no feedback to that extent from the legislators themselves. So there's no magic number. It's just what we feel strategically we can get approved. And while I agree with what Councilmember Hicks is saying, I also think that if you go to the general public and say, we have $25 million worth of projects, their interest stops there. They're not even going to give it the time of day to look at what the projects are and contemplate those, because big numbers are going to scare people. That's just the reality of that. So that was the rationale behind it, is, anything that we can do to make this number more appealing, and also to, while I appreciate things are cheaper today than they'll be down the road, we don't know what our city looks like in 15 years, and to tie up a tax for 15 years when this is probably our number one go-to funding mechanism, I think that was where there's a little bit of uncertainty that the committee had talked about. So there's no magic number. It was just, that was the sentiment of the legislative committee and where we wanted to start the discussion today. So, you guys could say tonight, don't change a thing, bring all 5 the way they are, and we'll go do that. But, that's totally up to you.
Okay.
But we've got multiple hurdles to cross. Even if we go with 5 projects, only 3 might get approved.
Right.
And then of the three, you know, as you say, it doesn't mean the general public's going to pass all three.
Right.
And I mean, the one question I have is, like, if, say we end up with 3 items on the ballot, you know, do you have to get presumably 50+% on each item for them to pass?
Right. Yep, individually, yep.
Yep.
Individually, correct.
So 15 years is 19.5 million. So I mean, do other people have opinions on, like, you know, somewhere between like 12 and 15 years, 10 to 15 years? Do people have, what do people think, Tom?
I think I'm comfortable with that time frame because I think if you look at what we stand to gain from these projects, this is what people are asking us to do is these types of things. And I think if you look at the aquatic center is going to bring people to town. The De Lagoon project is going to bring people to town. Trails, fire station is a necessity. I mean, that's just something that we need to do. And we're taking good care of the city and we're making investments in the future, which I think a lot of people in Fergus are ready to do. And people want to step up to the plate and people want to help out. So, and I think just like any project, if you educate the voters properly and show what this is going to get us down the road, not just can we please have a bunch of money, just this is how we're going to responsibly invest this money in our community to make it a better place and to do what people have asked us to do.
Well said, Tom. Yeah, Brent.
The one thing that I see a problem as far as getting the people on board on is every single time we do a project, I get emails, and it's, because the big thing that everybody wants fixed is the roads in town. And this is just one thing where they just automatically think that every time we spend money, well, you can spend that on roads. The only problem is, depending on where the funding came from, it dictates on what we can spend it on. And in this one here, we have to basically educate them and let them know that as much as we'd like to use this money for the roads, the point is the way the legislator has it set up, we really can't. And I just think we've got to get it out there however we can in order to get some support behind this, because otherwise they're going to be angry. They're going to be angry that we're not spending this to fix, the roads that are around town. I mean, we've already upped a certain percentage and we're going to keep upping a percentage to try to get the roads fixed. But I think a little bit of education as far as what we can and cannot spend the funds that we get from the state and from the taxpayers and from the sales tax is going to make this a little bit easier to swallow.
Sure. Bill, did you have a comment?
Brent kind of did follow up with what I was thinking about, how you as a council have taken good aggressive approaches to increasing that funding for streets. And you've done some really great projects that have taken a big bite out of that. We think of going back, Cleveland Avenue area was redone, then the hospital district redone, now that whole area on Mount Faith. Those are big projects and getting a lot done. Lincoln Avenue. So I think, you use the right word of saying educating the public of, we are doing streets and we are listening and we are increasing funding for streets every year too, because it is a priority. So
Sure.
I just agree. That's good.
One quick note to piggyback on what Brent said, and that's a really good point, is that is the first thing that we hear is when are you going to do something about the streets? And so then a piece of education that we could use is that these projects will help us increase our tax base. They're going to make people want to come and live here and work here, business relocate here, so that by getting these done, there's going to be a bigger pool of taxpayers to draw from to get things like the streets done. And also while explaining, we would love to use this money for streets, but we don't think the success at the legislature is going to be there. So just making sure that we're educating people.
Yeah, Joel.
And I think part of our education challenge is not really helped just by the terminology of the law that they passed. It's called a local option sales tax, but it can only be used on projects of regional significance, right? So we've been talking about this as a city sales tax that is applied to projects of regional significance. And even if you follow with that and say that does not include local roads and streets, or that does not include local streets. I mean, part of the challenge in messaging on this is that we need to make sure that we're saying that we have to have projects of regional significance, because I do think that cities will stumble if all they come up with is fixing their city streets that they feel is either a local obligation or an LGA obligation, or somehow tied into your state aid. Then I think cities will stumble on this, and I think we're trying to be careful not to do that. Selling it to the public that way, that these have to be projects that are regional in nature and that benefit the region, because the theory behind that is that it's really the region that is paying it. As a regional center, Fergus Falls gets visitors from all over Otter Tail County and all over the state. It's not just the Fergus Falls city residents, and that's why the regional significance is important. I mean, they should call it local option sales tax for regional projects, and that makes it a little easier for us, because that's really what it is.
Sure. Thanks, Joel. Okay, so maybe we just kind of recap where we're at. I mean, if anyone has any last closing comments or direction to the legislative committee, but we'll just, do you want Andrew just?
Sure. So what I heard was no pushback on the fire station renewal project, so 6.1 million related to the fire station renewal and the ladder truck. We're going to ask the Trails Committee to talk and explore the possibility of Old Smoky.
Yeah, focusing it down to a smaller segment and then including just some general costs of what Old Smoky would be.
And then partnering that with the possible remaining improvements on Stanton Avenue, or the pedestrian crossing and improvements in that area. The Aquatic Center at 7.1 million, and then D Lagoon Park at 5 million, with the soccer lighting being reduced, and giving more of a thought to that and seeing if there's other options related to that. Is that pretty accurate?
Did you have a dollar number for the trails then? You mentioned the pieces of the puzzle, but do we have a dollar number there or no?
I have no idea what the Old Smoky thing would cost. We've started just today inquiring about some of those things after we were asked, but I don't have enough to give you any certainty on that. And then we'll have to have Brian.
It would be less than we have on the paper now. We'll bring back a project that's less than what the 2.5 is.
Yeah, Brian will have to pull out the Stanton Avenue piece out of the bigger streets and infrastructure and give us a good number on that.
Everyone good with that?
I'm good with that.
Anyone in the audience have anything to add? All right. Thank you, everyone. This will be adjourned until.
Let's see if Joel has any.
Joel, did you have any closing comments?
Nope. I think very good and robust discussion. I think you see the challenge and the opportunity we have, and look forward to pushing forward. What the council and mayor, whatever you come up with. I think there will be legislative support for trying it. So we just got to make sure we meet our deadline by the 31st.
Great. Thank you, Joel. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Joel.
Yep.
I guess one final comment I would make is, if these projects are important to us and we're going to keep banging the drum on them for years and years and years, if we don't go forward with appealing, to the public to fund them now, well, then when are we going to do it?
Sure.
And if we're going to not use this method, well, then what? Do we put it on our general budget and we look to fund it that way? And is that going to be any more well-received if it's part of the property taxes to pay for our fire station or our aquatic center? Not necessarily. I think that's our best bet, is to go for it right now.
I agree. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.